Welcome to the Brand Wise podcast, where we talk about the big branding moves that business owners are making and the why behind it. I'm your host, Jess Freeman, here to help you be wise and be bold. Today on the podcast, I am chatting with my friend Kira La Forgia of Paradigm. Kira founded Paradigm to bridge the gap between corporate HR policies and the modern needs of entrepreneurs and small business owners. And Kira shared so many good nuggets in this episode. Like, you'll literally hear me. I'm like, okay, what am I? This needs to be a commercial. I don't know which quotes I'm going to pull to promote this episode. And Kira's new branding really instilled confidence in her business, which a lot of our guests have shared, and really represented her team, the services, and their values much more clearly than her DIY brand. So enjoy this really, really fun conversation with Kira. Thank you so much for being here, Kira. I am so excited to chat with you today. So to get us started, what is your brand all about?
Yeah. So, of course, it's evolved over the years, and I know we'll talk about that. But where we've kind of landed is that we really are driven to provide accessible HR resources to small businesses, even from, hiring your first employee. HR compliance matters, but also being able to dictate and define the kind of culture that you want to work in as a founder, and then being able to spread that to your team, no matter how small it is, can make the biggest difference in your business sustainability. And so our mission is really to bring really accessible and tangible HR practices to small business owners so they can see the power of some of the strategy that these corporations get to benefit from. And we do that through Paradigm.
I love it. That was so articulate. I love it.
Thank you.
And I really like that you mentioned like accessible, because I do think a lot of people, when they think about HR and hiring, they're like, oh, I don't need that yet. I'm not ready for that yet. And we're all small business owners. Like we all need it when we're hiring people. And I know if y'all are not following Kira on like Instagram or Threads, I see a lot of your threads, and you've been talking a lot about like employees versus contractors. And like I've known that information for a while, but like it's really important. So if you're listening and you're not following, make sure you go follow, because it's really important information. And at least for me, I don't want to get in hot water with that kind of stuff. So
Yeah, it's a lot, and it's evolved. So like, even if I think that's one thing, is that business owners are so savvy that, especially entrepreneurs, like we can bootstrap a lot of stuff. Like, I've even seen business owners shouldn't be doing this, but putting together their own contracts, leveraging AI, like whatever saves you money is really important to do. But I always kind of, and I know this is very morbid, but I always compare the HR compliance of employee contractors to like drinking and driving. Like, yes, it is expensive to get, your ride home in an Uber, but if you've got the money to spend the money on cocktails at a bar or a couple of glasses of wine, then, springing for that Uber, as much as it is going to be like sometimes like, 25 to 50 times more expensive than the actual like drive home in your car, the risk that you are avoiding is way, 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 way more than that. So I always tell people, like, I know it can feel really complicated and intimidating, but at the end of the day, like, it's not really something that we get to decide on. And just being aware and cognizant of how things have changed over the years can be really surprising to business owners that may have made a decision a couple of years ago about their risk, but knowing that those laws have changed even just this year on a federal level, I think I don't want anybody to be humbled by it, but just be aware of it and know that we have a ton of free resources out there so that you can learn about it.
Good. And I think this is really important. Like, this won't be, obviously we're not talking about this the whole episode, but I was just thinking, like, I know I have worked with clients that they're rebranding, redoing their website. And part of that is because they are moving from being like a solo business owner to like a group practice or an agency model. And I'm like, that is when we need HR. So I think this is a good,
yeah.
And you're here and we can come follow you. So thank you again for being here. So I know you mentioned there's been, some evolution of the Paradigm brand. So walk us through kind of like what that journey has been like and what made you decide to rebrand last year.
Yeah, I will be honest, like I have worked in small business for almost 15 years and I did particularly corporate sales in a really highly regulated industry before that. And I had no idea what I was getting into when I started working in this online sphere, this online community. Branding wasn't something that was ever really taught to me, or like even through business school. Like I didn't really understand what all that looked like because my focus was never on the marketing side.
Mm,
And so while I was working for small businesses, I was kind of just handed the branding that I would use and handed the voice that I would use. And then as I moved up through the ranks, I started to realize like how much of the voice I actually owned. I was the one writing the newsletters on behalf of the founders of the company. I was the one creating the social posts and the content and the creative and all of that marketing stuff. So in 2020, when I walked into, solopreneurship, I just wanted to be a consultant and I wanted to help female founded businesses. And during COVID, I had my first I call it like my adult summer break, although I don't say that to be like totally crass and rude because it was not a good time. But generally speaking, it was the first time I ever had a minute to myself, over
mm,
the last almost 2 decades. So for me, it was kind of a reckoning, I guess, of like understanding what I had been building up and the knowledge of business that I had versus how to meet in the middle from what I now needed to build. And branding ended up being the very first thing that I kind of poured myself into. But also, I already had the background for the legal and the finance and the HR. So, like, all of that felt really normal to me. But this felt like, what? Like, I have to have a brand, but also how fun. Like, it felt low
mhm,
stakes. It felt creative. It felt like an outlet. And the brand that I created was very much like I found this painting that was probably very millennial coded on Pinterest. And I literally sent it to this brand designer for $500. And I was like, this is what I want it to look like. And it was like pinks and blues and teals. And it wasn't really a reflection of me or who I was. It was just an aesthetic that I really liked. There
mm.
wasn't any thought behind it. And so, I was just really proud to have a business at all. So I didn't like, they sent me back like the concept and I was like, that's amazing. I can't believe my name, like my brand that I just made up is like on this. Like I didn't even know you could be like, no, I don't like that. I was like, great, thanks, bye. And so of course, like in building up to this rebrand that I know we're talking about today, it was like I had learned so much over the years that I was like, I can't wait to actually be more thoughtful and think a little bit more about what these decisions that feel small or felt small in 2020 might actually bring to my brand. And I mean, I know you'll get there, but the transformation was just so much more than just colors and logos. And the business has really transformed. I want to say as a result.
So that was in 2020 when you sent off the painting and like, okay, here, like, and so you paid for the branding. So did you do your own websites like with those branding pieces? Or
Yeah.
did you also hire for that part?
Yeah. So the weird thing is, and like I said, that's why I have so much respect for small business owners, online businesses, because we can do so much by ourselves.
Hmm.
I have used WordPress through my small business that I work for. And by small business, we have multiple locations and about 50 employees. And I'm now the COO of that company. So small, but not small.
Hmm.
And I had kind of tinkered around with WordPress and I knew about Elementor. So I was like, I had to make changes here and there about events we would have or whatever the case may be. So I was like, sure, I'll just do this. WordPress is the best. That's what I read on Pinterest or wherever I was looking for information. So yeah, I built a WordPress website by myself and that was crazy. And it was, I would say about a year in, I have a designer that I work really closely with. And I was like, can you tweak these sales pages? Like, I feel like I don't know why this doesn't look good. And then she just got in there and she doesn't even work with WordPress, but we were in the same mastermind and she was just trying to help me out. And essentially, I just saw the difference between whatever I was doing versus whatever she was doing and just how much those aesthetics and the strategy behind it make such a big difference. And so I would say it was like maybe 6 months later, we moved everything over to Show It and I hired her
Mm,
to actually do it for me. But I would say it was about a year and a half before I ever actually had somebody helping me with my website. And
yeah.
just the I mean, I know we'll get there, but just the confidence, like my sales went up immediately, like after and that was my
Amazing.
old brand. So it's just exponentially been, and I was so excited when you were having this podcast because I was like, I just feel like, and we work with so many designers and I'm like, it's not just colors and fonts. I was the
Mm-mm.
person that thought that. And now it's like, I can tell you like through my journey, like the confidence, the business success, how it's contributed to our vision, our internal employer brand versus our external employer brand, like stepping into conversations like this with confidence is all really because of creative pros that have helped me kind of figure out how to bring those visuals to life.
I love it. Yes, it is way more than just logos and colors. So, what made you decide like, oh, I need to like was there anything in specific that made you decide, oh, I need to rebrand, like I need to elevate this?
Well, I think because it was all very DIY and
Mm.
each step that I took, like, for example, like getting my brand done, I was like, this is incredible. I made a Google site, I think. Then I moved over to WordPress. And then a year later, my designer, moved everything to show it or did the sales page thing. And then a
Mhm.
couple months later, I was like, fine, show it, whatever that means. Sure. Move it over, that kind of stuff. And I never really I'm not the type that I'm like, I'm going to try to save money as far as I can. But when it comes to quality over quantity, I'm a fewer better person. So
Mhm.
I'm always going to throw my weight behind quality when I'm ready to make those moves. And I'd been making some money at the time, and that just felt like the natural next step. And so that like kind of progression of those three little steps up until even getting on Show It and having like a professional website. And then about a year or so later, I just started to realize like and also I'm a Taurus, which I don't know if that matters, but I'm loyal to a fault. And I had made this brand out of this painting, and that is what I was. And people would recognize my content and, just having a tiny following and having people start to listen to what I'm saying and be able to pick out my content out of a crowd and stuff like that felt really good. And so I think it was literally just one moment where I was like, I don't have to be this.
Mm.
This has nothing. This doesn't feel like me. This doesn't look like me. This doesn't look like my team that I've now developed. Like, I don't know what all this pink is and why I thought that was a good idea. I've never in my life been a person that I don't even wear pink. And like, it was just kind of this moment of like, oh, I can still have a strong brand and not have it look the way that it did when I was a baby brand.
Mm.
And I say that with the most love to myself because all my stuff looked like gender reveal parties. So at the end of the day, there was a little bit of humility that I was like, this is no longer who we are and who we're growing into. And I'm ready to make a bold move. And it just so happened to be at the same time that I decided that I needed to start a podcast. So
Mm.
to me, it felt like, well, it feels like a good time to kind of launch all of this, make big moves in this direction. And I also don't want to launch a podcast and then end up with a brand that doesn't align.
Mm.
So
Mhm.
that was, I think, a big catalyst for like actually sending the email being like, it's time for us to rebrand. And then from there, I mean, honestly, I just think it was one of the better decisions I've made in business, besides, of course, my team and the way that we've structured our offers.
And you bringing up the podcast being part of that catalyst, I think is really common. A lot of people who come work with me or really any designer, I find are ready to move into something new, whether that's a new niche, a new name, a podcast, they're launching a membership, a course. Like they want to align themselves and like prepare their brand and their business. And they're like, okay, I'm ready to like fully step up to the plate. And if I'm going to launch this thing, like I want it to feel good, like visually and just from a confidence standpoint. So I think that's really common because, yeah, no one wants to have to like redo the podcast art
Yeah.
and all of that stuff. So I think it makes sense and saves time. Now, did you like change your name at all in the rebrand or has that always been the same?
Yeah. The name's always been the same.
Okay.
So that was, I would say that even just choosing the name of the brand was, for me, it was backed in a couple of different, very traditional business thought processes. Number one is I never started this business because I wanted to have a big team with a bunch of employees, but I also knew that I was not starting a personal brand. I have
Mm.
friends that are influencers. I have friends that have built followings on Instagram and social media, LinkedIn, like all through all these different platforms. And I knew that that just wasn't who I am. So I knew that I didn't want to use my own name. So while I was still kind of juggling with what to name it, I'd been thinking about it for years. I knew I wanted to be a consultant since 2014 when I got my first mentor, but it just kind of hit me that I knew that what I wanted to name the brand. And then from there, it felt like that was a huge catalyst for starting the business in the first place, because suddenly you had this like place to put all these thoughts. And like I could actually pursue like the basic foundations of building a business because I actually had
Mm-hmm.
something to name it. And so I feel like that was one of the key steps, and even what was defining what the brand was, even though it was just me for like, almost a year. So I feel like there's a lot of different like elements that came into it, but that is the one part where I felt like because I was so strong and steady in naming the company Paradigm and understanding what that meant to me and all of that stuff, it was just a little bit easier to change directions in regards to the visual,
Mm-hmm.
because the brand name still stayed the same.
Yeah.
So I felt like that made it a little bit easier. I do think it would have been a lot more difficult, and I'm actually curious what your thoughts are on that, or I'm sure you have people that have talked about it. Um, I guess it just would have been a lot harder to do, to start all the way over again with a brand new name, which I've never had to do. So even though the brands are totally different, like pink and blue to green and orange, could not, like, I don't even think they're on the same side of the wheel or whatever it is. I feel like I still maintained the same audience. They still recognized who we were, what our
Mm-hmm.
message was, and all of that stuff. So it wasn't like people were like, who's that?
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. With it being so different, were there any parts of the old brand that were like hard to leave behind, or were you like, goodbye, blue and pink?
Pretty much. I mean, I think at that point, I wanted to tie in at least one of the visual elements into the new brand. So there was kind of something holding
Hmm.
hands. But once our designer actually created the concept and I started to see how different it really was and how much more aligned I felt with the brand as a whole, and the confidence I started to feel about what we were building, and the approach of now I have a team and I'm making these decisions, like that fueling some of these things. Nothing got carried over. Like I
Mm.
initially, like for example, I wanted it to be a little bit more like we had teal as one of our primary colors, and we wanted to kind of bring that over. But I mean, if you've seen our branding now, teal wouldn't have a place in there at all.
Mm-mm.
So we
Mm-mm.
really took that and kind of strategically took it in a different direction. And so I don't miss anything at all from the old brand. And I know this is like a little deep, but I do sometimes want to be reminded of like how it felt starting something new. And like
Mm.
sometimes when I look at our old brand stuff or I look at my old photos or whatever, I was just like so hopeful and excited. And I think after a while you get a little bit jaded. So it's not really the brand, but more that felt like a different company. When I was by myself
Mhm.
figuring this out, like made $5,000 my first year, like all that stuff. And that was amazing. I was like so proud. Like $5,000, like it never ceases to amaze me that we can just make money out of thin air, especially after working for someone else for so long, feeling
Uh-huh.
trapped in a lot of places. I will never be the first person that like gets jaded about that. And so I do sometimes miss like the way when I look back on those moments, but it's kind of like a chapter of your life. Like you look
Yeah.
back on things and you're like, wow, that was a really weird belt I thought I should wear in the early aughts or whatever. But I'm glad that I left it behind because it feels really, the whole vision had to change in order to really catch up to where we are.
It can be hard going into a rebrand with thinking, I want to like hold on to this piece, or like you said, the hand holding, that's a great analogy. Um, to like carry that over, because sometimes people want that kind of consistency. But I'm glad that you were able to like let it go
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
step into something new. Because I will say, if anyone's listening, I'm like, oh, should I like have something that carries over? I think in some ways, sure, it can be beneficial, but like there's nothing that says you have to. And brands, big companies change colors all the time, and they don't carry anything over.
Hmm.
Like Kajabi just rebranded. and
Oh,
they completely changed colors.
wild changes. Yeah.
And yes, I mean, that might not be a great example because people are like, "Wait, what is happening?" But it's not necessarily like that you have to, especially at our level, like it's not as important. So if you're like, I need to cut ties with all of these colors, like do what Kira did and just let them go. They can be in the memories. And like, I too like to look back at my old brands and like old brand
Hmm.
photos. And I have several photos where I'm like, in nature, like there's like dead trees behind me because we took pictures in probably like November or something. And I'm like, why did I think that these were good brand photos?
Well,
Like,
it's so fun to look back at them too, because at the time I was like, "We are crushing this," and it was like, "Oh," um, and like, yeah, sure, you look cute, a little younger. I'm into that, but at the end of the day, like a little Botox and new colors, like you're totally fine. But that was truly it. Like, I think that it didn't matter. Like, if you wanna
mm,
carry something over, and part of that was because my designer, who I really trust, was like, we really wanted to symbolize growth. When you're growing a team,
mm,
when you're growing a business, and teal isn't necessarily a green that would symbolize that.
right.
So there was meaning behind each of the colors that were chosen, and I was really guided by my designer. And like I said, I'm going to go to the experts. Like, that's one
Hmm.
thing I've learned in small business. You'll get further if you trust the experts that you choose to hire. And I think that once the designs and like the actual concepts were presented and teal was nowhere to be found, I didn't even notice it, because I was like, this is so much more the direction
Mm,
that I want to go in. It feels so comfortable. I feel so aligned. Like, it was just really clear that maybe a little bit of symbolism, but there was no place in the new path for the old version. Like, that's just something we had to leave behind, and it felt great. So I don't think it really did a detriment at all to not carry it over.
mm. I'm over here like, ooh, that's like a good thread. I almost said tweet, but I'm like, I don't tweet. So good thread. I'm like, so many quotables. Okay, so you mentioned earlier that like once you rebranded, you saw a big shift, like more inquiries and stuff. So let's talk about like what all you think, like how has the rebrand impacted your business?
I feel like at the end of the day, it's just about being clear and solid in the direction that you're moving. And for me, having something that felt so curated and clear and direct and pointed in the same, like everybody's pointing in the same direction, felt like such a good opportunity to kind of re-envision what the next phase of Paradigm was going to look like. And so I guess there was like definitely a few times where I was like, oh, I'm not 100% sure, like, how I feel about sending this particular person to this new website. Like, I don't know. It's not all about me. I'm not the person in the hero image. What if they don't trust me? Like, a lot of these people are scared to death of hiring an employee. Like, they want to talk to me. Like, they don't want to talk to my team members yet. They will, because they're better. But at the time, it was very like, oh gosh, like, and I didn't want to be very corporate. Like, corporate HR is not what we do. It's like, we basically don't speak the same language. Most HR consultants don't like me because I don't kind of hold up the same business model that they have come to rely on. And that's a whole other discussion. So there was like a moment of like, oh no, like, you're going to think I'm too like disconnected, or you're not going to trust me or whatever. But really, the confidence, like, once I started to see the response from people, like looking at the material, feeling like they were guided in a specific direction, the message was hitting home a lot more quickly without me actually having to say anything. It just felt so good to send people in that direction and know that my website and my brand was like a true representation of how we show up for our clients. I've only had a couple of times where I've had clients that have been like, well, I worked with this lawyer that had really great marketing and their website was beautiful, and then they sucked. So I'm only going to pay you 50% up front and then 50% when the project is done, because that lawyer screwed me over and everything was great and the marketing was so beautiful and blah, blah, blah.
Mm,
But I think I was afraid of that happening a lot. And that's only happened twice. And those clients are still super happy. And they were like, okay, great. So it was kind of funny. Like, I don't know if it makes sense, but like, showing up, like, in a real quality and put together way can feel a little bit vulnerable in a different way than the way I normally would show up, which is sort of like very smart, but there's a lot of chaos happening. So I wanted to make sure that no matter what was going on that was making the brand approachable, there was still somewhere I could send people to that really explained that we understood how serious the work that we're doing is. Because we're not lawyers and we are people first, but we're also not so disconnected from what's going on in the day-to-day lives of our clients. Like, we're helping people hire their first employee, or we're helping tens of $1 million valuation businesses decentralize the founder so they can sell. And there's a place for all of these people within the brand. And I think that confidence of knowing that my website was going to show both sides of us, both sides of me, and both sides of my team was such a relief. Honestly, it felt like a breath of fresh air. It felt like I had another whole person working for me, helping to get the message out.
Girl. I'm like, that is what I want people to experience with their website. I, as a designer, I feel like we undervalue and like undersell ourselves through a website. I'm like, my new campaign is going to be like, raise your standard for your website. Because I want people, like you said, to have this like, oh, I feel confident like that people are going to know what to expect and understand us from the website. It's going to do a lot of the heavy lifting for me. And it's just a relief to like have that experience from your website instead of being like, okay, I'm going to expect Instagram to do all this heavy lifting and explain all the things, but actually having that really solid foundation with the website. So I mean, I'm biased, but I love that you have that with your website. And I didn't even do your website, but I love that you have that with your website because I think more business owners need to have that experience and that confidence in their brand. So I love that you have that.
Yeah, I mean, I know that this is a podcast for creatives, and I know that who you serve, and I know that there's lots of crossover in our audiences and things like that. And I just, like, I don't know if this is going to help you book clients or whatever, but at the end of the day, like, if Jess is the person that you feel that you can trust, I don't remember how much I paid for my website, for my designer. I don't remember, like, you know, how much I was kind of strapping it together and, you know, making sure I could afford it. But I will say that it's one of those key components in your business that will last you the test of time if you do it right. And I know that because I didn't do it right for a couple of years. And even just the one time when I first had my designer move us over to show it, and she did like the lowest possible lift just to get me out of WordPress and into show it, we had our biggest sales month. And I'm still chasing those numbers to this day right after. And I don't think it had much to do with anything except for the confidence that I felt sending people there. And also, like, it more, I mean, in the first month, it more than paid for what I paid for the website. And there's just, I think that if we're able to switch from like these quick little wins and quick little business purchases that are meant to be band-aids on bullet holes into a more high level perspective of things that are going to stand the test of time, be quality over quantity, and that there are things that you can lean on in your business long term, that is really just setting you up for business sustainability. And to me, that leap in not only the rebrand and making it be more aligned, but also in putting the money and throwing some investment behind the strategy behind it has been such a game changer for my confidence. I can't even believe that it was almost 2 years ago we did the rebrand because it still feels so aligned with who we are and what we're doing. And that's more than worth the price that you pay for a good website.
Okay, so I'm going to like cut out some of that and it's just going to be like a little commercial and I'll just pay you royalties.
Great, I'll take it.
Coming to I don't Instagram feed near you.
Yeah.
I love that. Yes, yeah. It needs to stand the test of time, and it's just, it goes back to like raising the standard for your website and your brand as a whole. Like you need that confidence piece, and that is the one thing that every single guest on this podcast has said so far is they feel more confident. And I think people aren't aware of how much they are like avoiding sending people to their website, and that's costing them those sales. And so it just, we gotta step into it and like really.
I mean, Truly, like, I know that, like, you are unapologetic about what you do and how you do it and who you help and who you've helped in the past, which I know we also share a couple of clients, which has been fun to realize. But at the end of the day, like, every the thing about this industry, or like businesses that are primarily online, making a name for ourselves online, people talk about it being your storefront or a billboard or something like that. But really, it's just another tool to help get your message and your vision out there. And I think that when we leave it as a visual thing or a that looks pretty thing, or there's, strategy is important, but also it's like more a representation of not who you are now, but also the direction that you want to go. Like, your business, your team, your offers have no choice but to elevate to the standard that your brand has set for itself. And I think that's one of the only places in business where we can truly offload that responsibility to an expert and put it in their hands and trust what it is that you all are doing, so that we
Mm-hmm.
can focus on knowing all the laws in all 50 states and still not make sure that we're missing out on the people that are really like, if I had a crap website, we work with a ton of marketing agencies. The first thing they're going to want to do is tell me my
Mm-hmm.
website's crappy. And the last thing
Right.
they're going to want to do is trust me to help them hire their marketing
Mm-hmm.
pro team. So, like,
Mm-hmm.
to me, it just feels like there's so many relevancies across the board, and it's opened up so much confidence to work with a lot of different industries that I previously may have been more hesitant to share our information. The biggest problem I have is just there's so much good stuff on the website at this point. After a certain amount of time, you have hundreds of blogs and all these different offers and the pages, and copy is something that was one of the biggest investments I ever made in my business. And now I have an in-house copywriter, and I only have 4 people on my team. So there goes to show you.
Nice.
But there's something there with the messaging and just being really called in to like what
Mm-hmm.
your brand is saying about you. And the only way to get ahead in the online space is to make sure that you have a solid brand, because there are a bunch of scammers and a bunch of grifters, and there has to be something that's going to set you apart. And I think a designer, somebody that's in tune with branding, is going to be able to really take you to that next level. And your clients are going to appreciate that effort and know that they can take you seriously too.
From a very simple standpoint, I love how much you value and understand the importance of branding, and how much that feeds into the confidence of your brand and as you as a business owner. So that's just really, I appreciate it. As someone who understands it and values it, it's always nice to like see others not as a designer value and understand it, and how much it can really like help your business. So you have given a lot of great insight and feedback. So I don't know if you have anything else left, but my last question is, what advice do you have for someone listening who's like thinking about rebranding but doesn't want to let go and is scared to take the leap?
Um, I mean, if you're thinking about it, then it probably needs to happen, I guess.
Mm,
Like, I
yeah.
don't think that once you get that little inkling in your head that something isn't right, or that your brand isn't keeping up with you in the direction that you want to go, you're probably not going to be able to get rid of it. So you might as well just do it. And then you will evolve over time, and a good designer, a good brand strategist is going to create space for that evolution to also happen
Hmm.
within the consistency. And I think that that's one thing that us service providers or people in professional services don't always know going into starting a business, but you just learn really quickly, is that there is a whole world behind the visuals and the brand messaging that we don't have to know what it means,
Mm,
but there's a lot of people out there sharing all that information. So finding somebody you trust, if you're already having that inkling, like, go chase it, because truly, I think that if you're a person like me that likes to see something come to life, and then you're more likely to rise to the occasion, a really solid brand strategy, a really solid investment in your design of your website, a really is just the same thing as investing in a team member. And you are going to have to rise to the occasion. You are going to have to create products that are going to back up the brand that you've created. And it's an exciting and fun time. And it doesn't have to be like this horrible mess of a disaster. Like, it can actually be like a really fun way to embody who you, and not to sound like so woo, but like to embody your future self, your future CEO
mm-hmm.
self, the future brand that you want to have. And I think that that was one thing that I just didn't know at all. And especially working in HR, I'm like, how did I get here? Like, I'm a marketer, but I'm in HR and operations. Like, I don't know how this happened. And the only people are always like, you always look like you have your shit together and it looks like you know I don't. I just hire the right people to do those things to make up for the fact that I'm a disaster, So I'm way more obsessed with what's going on with Connecticut voting laws than what's going on our Instagram. And I think our clients really value that, but they also probably wouldn't necessarily be as attracted to a bunch of corporate mumbo jumbo lingo in the small business space where that stuff probably sounds really scary to them. And having a designer that truly understands like the dichotomy of whatever your message is and whatever you're trying to put out there in your audience, it will just, it'll pay for itself over and over and over and over again. So just do it. Like if you're already thinking of it, just do it.
Yep. I agree. Like if it starts to cross your mind, like I would say like that's already a signal that you just know that it's time.
Yeah.
And you're just waiting because, you're scared or it's not the right time or you're like, whatever it could be.
It's expensive or whatever.
Yeah. But this was amazing. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah.
Of course, let us know, where can we connect with you online?
Yeah, well, Instagram's great. I still do my own graphic design, so don't judge my designer based on that. Instagram's a good spot. I think our podcast has tons of resources, especially if you're interested in the employee contractor stuff that we briefly touched on. Those are like right around episode 60 of our podcast when the law changed this year. And yeah, LinkedIn is always a good spot too, but I would say that I'm much more responsive on Instagram. And all of that is to say that I think at the end of the day, like we're all learning and growing. And I think that sometimes it can be really intimidating to listen to a business owner on a podcast like this and find out, like I was talking to this girl the other day, sorry to go on a tangent, but she was like, I just went to this like networking event and then I heard this lawyer talking about employee contractor stuff and I'd had some drinks and I was like, oh shit, like now I have to worry about this. This sucks. Like, and she was like, whatever. So I booked a call, and it was kind of, I think that maybe if people listening to this podcast are like, oh, God damn it. Like I came here to talk about rebranding and to get motivated. And now I think I have to reclassify my people. Like you're not alone. Trust me, it happens. It doesn't mean you're less of a business owner because you haven't heard of this stuff. Like it's my job to know it, not yours. So I think like I have plenty of free resources. Like feel free to shoot me a message and I'll send you over some stuff. And if we can help you, we can help you. But if not, you'll have all the information you need to make good decisions.
Okay. I will link to all of that in the show notes. But thank you again for being on the show. If today's branding story inspired you and you're ready to start your own rebrand adventure, head over to justcreatives.com/rebrand to explore how we can work together on your brand. If you enjoyed today's show, be sure to leave a review or share it on Instagram and tune in next week for another episode.